From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. For centuries, the Arapaho have called Colorado and Wyoming home. The tribe gave names to places like the Kawanichi Valley, the Never Summer Mountains, and Mount Blue Sky. But the language the Arapaho have spoken for centuries is at risk of disappearing as fewer members of the tribe have learned the language. But a team of language experts at the University of Colorado Boulder is working to change that. They're compiling an online database that includes recordings of the Arapaho language and can be used as a teaching tool. Here's an example from the database. This is an Arapaho speaker sharing a story commonly told to kids. CU linguistics professor Andrew Cowell helped launch this project more than 2 decades ago. He specializes in preserving indigenous languages, and he hopes the digital database helps future generations learn and continue to speak the Arapaho language.
I am not indigenous, but my wife is actually Native Hawaiian. And after I met her, I got interested in Hawaiian language and culture, and we lived up there for a while, and I learned Hawaiian. So when I got hired at CU, I said, well, I should explore the indigenous language of Colorado, which is Ute, Cheyenne, or Arapaho. And Arapaho is really the one that, in northern Colorado at least, is most obvious with Arapaho boulevards and Arapaho community colleges and so forth.
When is a language considered endangered, and why is Arapaho in that category?
Really, when the kids are not learning the language anymore at home, that's when a language starts to be endangered. And that's what's happened to Arapaho. Basically, in the 1950s and 60s, is people started raising their children speaking English, and they've never been able to recover, so to speak, because, of course, that generation then couldn't pass the language on.
Andy, a project like this database depends on a lot of trust. You mentioned you are not of Arapaho descent. Talk about how you establish trust with Native elders and community members that you have worked with.
You really have to demonstrate right from the start that you're interested in a relationship, a long-term relationship, because Native Americans have had many negative experiences with people coming to a community just one time, extracting some data and leaving. And, what did the community get out of it? Nothing. So I actually learned some Arapaho before I went there. And so when I first met some of the Arapaho elders and teachers, I couldn't say much. I couldn't understand hardly anything, but I showed that I had tried and that I actually had tried to learn and that I could say a few sentences. And that showed a level of commitment where they felt like, maybe this guy's worth cultivating, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And that kind of continued for several years. And it really took quite a while to actually be adopted into the tribe. But it's been a great relationship with them over the years.
That must have been a fascinating first meeting where you had learned a few words, but really couldn't understand what was going on.
Yeah. And of course, they tease you. And they tease you in English and they tease you in Arapaho. And it's really a test to see, if you have the humility and the good humor to fit into the community and to accept that position. It's also a great language learning tool to get teased and to try to figure out what were they doing with that double entendre there in Arapaho.
Well, let's talk about the Arapaho database, which is already being used by some folks who are studying the language. How does someone use it if they are curious about how to say something in Arapaho?
So we do have an online dictionary, which is available to the public. And so that is open to anybody. It's on the web. And we also have a language learning website, which is available to anyone as well. It's called the Arapaho Language Project. It has language learning lessons. It has sound files on it. And so you can start learning some basic Arapaho and look things up. The overall database, however, it consists of over 100,000 sentences, mostly of conversation and narrative. Mm-hmm. What we are trying to do is we're trying to extract useful bits of that database and turn it into curriculum for the students in the schools. Because at this point, it's clear that the language can't be saved in the home anymore. It's going to have to be learned by teenagers, young adults, and then ultimately also by children in the schools. And hopefully after that, they will then know it well enough to teach it at the home, and it can go back into being a home language potentially. But that can't happen for at least a generation. And so what we're trying to do is this bottleneck generation has to learn Arapaho before the last elders are gone so they can carry the language on.
You and your colleagues are working to create a curriculum for students in Oklahoma and Wyoming to learn the language. I want to play an example of what this sounds like. This is a story that uses the words bird and cat in several sentences.
Hina wa ni na hawa ni ehin. Hina ni ehi ni akut ha ta wa khu ni ni. Hini wa na ka kha iya hat ha ta nis.
Andy, could you explain what we just heard and how this fits into the teaching curriculum?
Yeah, that's actually a story that a grad student of mine worked with one of the native speakers to develop. And he actually was one of the first people to do this. And he now works for the Eastern Cherokee tribe. The idea is we've recorded a lot of native speakers telling what you would say traditional narratives, but they tend to be very long. They can be very complicated. They're very rich poetically and literarily, we might say, but they're not necessarily good for a first grader or a second grader to learn the language. And so what we need to do is we need to record much simpler stories that have a lot of repetition, that are easy to follow, that can be accompanied by gesture, ideally. And so that's what that story was, is an attempt to kind of do the equivalent of first grade English, where we have these readers, John sees the dog is running, John chases the dog. It's exactly the same thing, except it's in Arapaho, but we don't have it, believe it or not.
Yeah, kind of the equivalent of a Dr. Seuss book.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, the process of this. You've gathered thousands of conversations over the years to help fill in this database. Can you share a moment in this process that was, memorable or fun for you?
Oh, there's so many of those. It would be hard to,
pick a favorite.
Pick out any particular one. But, just as an example, I was recording a couple of women outside of the tribal college in Wyoming, and I just went up and was talking to them a little bit, and then they took over and started speaking Arapaho, and I was recording. And then usually they talk to each other, but one of the women didn't know me as well. And so she asked the other woman, what is his name? And the other woman didn't say my actual name, which is High Eagle. She kind of teased me and she said, oh, his name is High Buzzard, and started laughing. And then the other woman started laughing with her. And I kind of tried to joke back and say, some people call me High Meadowlark as well, or something like that. So it's just really fun when people get to the point where they know that you know the language well enough that you can really understand what's going on in those kind of settings. Ideally, it's supposed to be just the native speakers talking, right? I mean, nobody needs to hear me necessarily, but I think it is valuable to show that other people can learn the language, that you don't have to be born as a native speaker. And so I think it is important to document students trying to speak the language as well.
Andrew Cowell is a professor of linguistics at CU Boulder and faculty director of the Center for Native American and Indigenous Studies. He and a team of collaborators are working to preserve recordings of the Arapaho language and develop instructional materials around them. We'll have a link to the Arapaho Language Project in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.